Saracen, summer of 1940. The air trembles with distant sirens and the faint rhythmic pulse of anti-aircraft guns. Smoke drifts above the Thames as blackout curtains turn the city into a silhouette. On the rain-darkened docks, a solitary figure steps through the mist, a leather suitcase in hand. Ordinary, unmarked, almost absurdly plain. Around him the war hums like static in the background. The thud of boots, the creak of cranes, the low grumble of engines preparing for another night under threat. He pauses by a mooring bollard, adjusts his coat collar, and leaves the case by a stack of cargo. It looks like nothing. Yet inside that apparent emptiness lies one of the most elegant traps in the history of espionage. Europe has already fallen silent under Nazi occupation. In June, France capitulated after 6 brutal weeks of fighting. British troops have only just escaped the beaches of Dunkirk. Across the Channel, German intelligence and the Abwehr is emboldened, certain that the island nation cannot hold out for long. But Britain is not broken. Beneath the surface, a war of deception is being born, a contest of patience, nerve, and misdirection that will soon redefine intelligence itself. The man on the dock works for MI5's newly established counter-espionage division, Section B1A. His mission is to seed misinformation so convincingly that even the Abwehr's sharpest minds will believe it. The suitcase, carefully presented as a courier's delivery, is supposedly filled with sensitive military blueprints stolen from a government office. German handlers have arranged a pickup, a brief exchange under the cover of fog, in the narrow alleys between warehouses near Wapping. The British operative knows they're watching. Every move is a performance, every hesitation part of the script. When the German contact retrieves the suitcase, his expression betrays no suspicion. He hurries away into the night, unaware that inside the case lies no paper, no maps, no plans, only a hidden device transmitting the moment the latches click open. The Abwehr believes it has intercepted Allied secrets. In truth, it has taken the bait of an invisible snare. For the next several hours, signals flicker through the ether. A receiver hidden in a nearby van captures the faintest electrical pulse from the suitcase. MI5 technicians hunch over dials and meters, recording the exact moment of contact. The Germans don't realize that by retrieving the case, they've triggered a silent alarm, a beacon that allows the British to trace their courier routes, safe houses, and listening frequencies. What looked like a routine exchange has become the seed of an intelligence windfall. The strategy is deceptively simple: feed the enemy's appetite. The Abwehr's London section, desperate for success after Dunkirk, had demanded actionable intelligence to restore confidence in their agents. So when a supposed insider offered classified material, they jumped. What they didn't know was that MI5 had already turned several of their informants into double agents under the XX Committee, whose motto summed up the new art of deception: turn the spy, use the spy, mislead the enemy. The suitcase was their masterpiece of misdirection, an empty object that carried nothing yet delivered everything. As the night deepened, the operative vanished into the city, leaving only wet footprints and a trail of confusion. The suitcase made its way through layers of German hands, London to Lisbon, Lisbon to Hamburg, each handler convinced they were carrying a prize. Yet with every transfer, the British gathered another fragment of the Abwehr's hierarchy, identifying voices, call signs, and meeting locations. The trap was now global. Meanwhile, in the offices of MI5 and Bletchley Park, analysts began to cross-reference the intercepted chatter. Messages once meaningless now fit patterns. They could predict movements, decode schedules, anticipate replacements. What had begun as one silent deception on a London pier was quietly undermining the entire structure of German intelligence. For the first time since the fall of France, the British were not just surviving, they were outthinking the enemy. And somewhere in Berlin, a question began to stir among the Abwehr's senior officers. How had one unremarkable exchange gone so wrong? The answer, still invisible to them, lay inside that empty case humming softly in the dark. Across the Atlantic, the same web of deceit began to tighten. By 1941, German espionage reached deep into the heart of the United States: docks, factories, shipyards, even the offices of major corporations. The Abwehr's crown jewel in America was the Duquesne Spy Ring, a network of over 30 agents led by Fritz Joubert Duquesne, a South African adventurer, engineer, and lifelong enemy of the British Empire. Under his guidance, German spies infiltrated American industries, photographing blueprints, charting shipping lanes, and reporting on weapons production. It was the largest espionage operation ever uncovered on U.S. soil, but the FBI was already watching. In an era before digital surveillance, counterintelligence relied on patience, wires, and luck. The Bureau had learned from Britain's deception methods, particularly the success of the empty suitcase operation that had sown discord within the Abwehr. Inspired by its results, J. Edgar Hoover's agents began using similar psychological tactics: controlled leaks, double agents, and staged deliveries. Every message Duquesne's network sent to Germany was intercepted, decoded, and mirrored back through falsified channels. The FBI wasn't merely observing the enemy, it was feeding him. In hidden rooms across New York and Long Island, FBI technicians installed microphones behind wall panels, inside clocks, even within furniture. They recorded everything: conversations in German, references to the courier, to the London case. Slowly, the Bureau began to realize the scale of the connection. The intelligence vacuum created by MI5's operation in Europe had rippled across the Atlantic, disorienting the Abwehr's American branch. Deception in London had sparked confusion in New York. By late 1941, the Bureau had identified nearly every operative in the Duquesne ring. Agents shadowed meetings in hotel lobbies, tracked packages through postal routes, and documented the flow of money from German diplomatic channels. Duquesne himself, proud and reckless, met his subordinates at a Manhattan cafe, unaware that every word he spoke was recorded through a hidden microphone. His downfall was sealed by the very arrogance that had once made him valuable. Then, in the final days of 1941, as war exploded across the Pacific and Germany declared war on the United States, the trap was sprung. In coordinated raids across New York, Newark, and Chicago, FBI teams arrested 33 agents simultaneously. The operation stunned the world. For the first time, the full extent of German espionage in America was laid bare. The result: 33 convictions over 300 years of combined prison sentences, and the complete dismantling of the Abwehr's U.S. network. The aftermath was more than just numbers. Inside Germany, the loss rippled like an earthquake. Handlers began to question the reliability of every courier, every cipher, every report. In London, the success validated MI5's bold approach. Deception, not brute force, could unravel an empire of secrets. The empty suitcase had become more than an isolated trick. It had evolved into a method, a philosophy. Mislead the enemy by letting them believe their own reflection. By early 1942, as the Allies strengthened their intelligence cooperation, the Abwehr's once feared global web was crumbling from within. Its agents doubted one another. Its transmissions grew hesitant, contradictory, nervous. What began as a single planted device on a foggy London dock had turned into a contagion of mistrust stretching across continents. The Germans had been undone not by superior technology, but by the quiet precision of human psychology. The war of shadows was now entering a new phase, one where the most dangerous weapon was belief itself. Every piece of history we uncover brings the past a little closer. If you'd like to keep exploring these hidden moments with us, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Your support keeps these stories alive. In the quiet upper room of a London townhouse, the unremarkable leather case rested on a table surrounded by cables, soldering irons, and the smell of warm metal. MI5 technicians worked in silence, fitting components into the false lining. A miniature transmitter, a pressure switch, a concealed microphone thinner than a pencil lead. When the lid closed, it looked ordinary. Just another courier's satchel among hundreds moving through wartime London. But this one was different. This case would listen. It was a feat of engineering born out of necessity. By 1940, Britain's counterintelligence units were still improvising, learning as they went. Every tool had to be small, silent, and deniable. The suitcase, once opened by an unsuspecting German agent, would transmit a coded signal to a receiver hidden nearby. Not a voice transmission, but a pulse of confirmation that the handover had taken place. It was a whisper through the static, the kind of clue only trained analysts at Bletchley Park could interpret. In an age before microchips, before transistors, this was as close to invisible surveillance as human hands could make. When the German handler lifted the latches for the first time, he unknowingly sent that pulse rippling through the night. Across the city, in a van parked beside an empty warehouse, British radio officers froze. On their dials, the brief flicker of a signal confirmed the trap had sprung. Within minutes, analysts marked the time, direction, and strength of transmission. Within hours, they could triangulate who met whom and where the case was taken. What looked like an ordinary courier exchange became a map of enemy movements. The Germans never realized it. They thought they'd stolen valuable documents, and the Abwehr praised the courier's success. Reports streamed from London to Hamburg describing acquired Allied logistics. Those reports, now under British observation, allowed MI5 to trace every route the information took, every operative who handled it. It was as if the Germans had illuminated their own invisible network. From May 1940 through late 1941, this technique repeated across Europe and North America. Suitcases, satchels, and envelopes carried not papers but microphones, transmitters, and tracers. Through them, the Allies built a live picture of German espionage. Who coordinated messages, which couriers connected which safe houses, how money changed hands. The empty case was no longer just a deception. It had become a listening post in the enemy's pocket. The results were devastating for the Abwehr. Couriers disappeared. Codes that once seemed secure suddenly failed. Double agents who thought they were playing both sides found their next meeting under surveillance. In Madrid, Lisbon, and Stockholm, neutral hubs filled with intrigue, German officers began questioning why Allied counter-moves came so swiftly. The truth was simple. The enemy's own briefcases were talking. In London, Section B1A compiled the data with methodical precision. Lists of names cross-checked with intercepted transmissions from the Y service. Every time a suitcase changed hands, more threads emerged in the web. Each thread led to a new node, a code clerk, a banker, a naval attaché, until what once seemed a vast, invisible empire of espionage resolved into a pattern of faces and addresses. The Abwehr, proud of its reach, had become transparent. And so the question grew louder in Berlin. How had they been outwitted by something so trivial, so unassuming? The answer lay not in technology alone, but in psychology. The Abwehr trusted appearances, documents, signatures, the weight of a case. The British understood that deception begins in perception. One empty suitcase had become a mirror reflecting their entire intelligence system back at them, until they could no longer tell truth from illusion. In a war fought with tanks and bombers, this victory made no sound. But in the silence of that room, under the hum of the hidden transmitter, the balance of the intelligence war shifted forever. By the winter of 1941, the aftershocks of the suitcase operation reverberated through two capitals, Berlin and Washington. In Berlin, the Abwehr's command center at Tirpitzufer was in disarray. Messages contradicted one another. Reports vanished into filing cabinets never to be seen again. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, demanded answers. His agents in Britain had failed to deliver reliable information for months. Each new lead dissolved into confusion, and each courier captured brought stories of intercepted briefcases and double agents. The machinery of German intelligence, once sleek, feared, and efficient, had jammed. Meanwhile, in Washington, the FBI celebrated a triumph. The exposure of the Duquesne Spy Ring had shown that America was no longer the open hunting ground German agents once believed. In the Bureau's new radio rooms, technicians replayed recorded conversations of Duquesne's men talking about their London source, unaware that the British case which inspired their confidence was itself a trap. For both nations, the lesson was stark. Deception, when perfected, could travel across oceans faster than any fleet. Within the Abwehr, suspicion turned inward. Was the failure due to traitors, or had British intelligence truly mastered manipulation? Field officers demanded new cipher systems. Handlers relocated their safe houses overnight. In Lisbon, couriers were ordered to destroy old codebooks. In Madrid, diplomats burned entire caches of microfilm. But no purge could erase the damage. Trust, the currency of espionage, had collapsed. German agents began fearing their own colleagues more than the enemy. In Britain, MI5 and MI6 recognized the opportunity. Every German adjustment, every new cipher introduced, was another pattern to study, another system to infiltrate. Intelligence officers no longer reacted to the Abwehr. They anticipated it. Reports from Bletchley Park suggested that even high-level communications between Berlin and its embassies were now vulnerable. By forcing the Abwehr to constantly rewrite its codes, the British increased their chances of breaking them. The ripples of one deception had reshaped the flow of global intelligence. In Washington, the reaction was more public. Newspapers headlined the FBI's success, praising Hoover's vigilance and the efficiency of American counterespionage. Yet behind the applause, a quieter partnership deepened. British security coordination, the covert MI6 presence in New York, expanded its cooperation with the FBI. Joint training sessions introduced American agents to British deception tactics. How to stage false leaks, how to feed controlled misinformation, how to listen without being seen. The empty suitcase became a case study for the new transatlantic intelligence alliance. By the end of 1941, the contrast between the two intelligence empires could not have been sharper. The Abwehr had become defensive, reactive, isolated. The Allies, meanwhile, grew bolder, more interconnected. Deception had evolved from a single act to a strategy, one that blurred the line between truth and performance. From that point onward, Allied intelligence would fight not only to gather secrets, but to shape what the enemy believed was true. And in the shadowed offices of Berlin, where the lights now burned late into the night, Canara stared at reports stamped unverified and contradictory. Somewhere in London, he knew someone had rewritten the rules of his profession, but it was already too late to undo them. It began quietly, a dawn sweep in Brooklyn, the creak of apartment stairs, the muffled shouts of FBI agents moving in formation. Across the Atlantic in the fog of early December 1941, British operatives conducted parallel raids. The net had drawn tight. Years of deception, misdirection, and intercepted signals converged in one synchronized operation. The Suitcase deception, with its hidden transmitter and phantom intelligence, had not only exposed individual spies, it had revealed the structure of the entire Abwehr network in North America. For months, FBI analysts had mapped connections from intercepted radio traffic to addresses, bank accounts, and safe deposit boxes. Every arrest confirmed what MI5 already suspected, that German intelligence had lost control of its own agents. When the first arrests came, the Abwehr's response was disbelief. Duquesne's men had been considered loyal, disciplined, unbreakable. Yet by the end of December, one after another confessed, turning evidence to reduce their sentences. The German network collapsed in days. Reports later revealed that as panic spread, couriers destroyed documents, burned microfilm, and tried to flee the country. None succeeded. The FBI had already sealed the ports and monitored every wire leaving the continent. In courtrooms across New York, 33 men faced the weight of wartime justice. The trial was swift and conclusive, 300 years of combined sentences. Newspapers dubbed it the greatest spy roundup in American history, but the real significance wasn't in the numbers. It was in what the arrests represented, the complete inversion of an intelligence hierarchy that had once stretched from Berlin to Buenos Aires. For the British, the results validated years of patient risk. The empty suitcase was now more than an operation. It was a symbol of psychological mastery in warfare. It proved that victory in the intelligence world came not from brute force or superior technology, but from understanding how the human mind interprets trust and fear. Every German agent caught in the dragnet was a testament to the power of illusion. As the final verdicts were read in January 1942, the FBI's Washington office received a cable from London. It contained a single line. The case is closed in every sense. The message was both literal and symbolic. The same object that had started the operation, that modest leather case, had now completed its journey. It had traveled from deception to exposure, from illusion to revelation. In Berlin, however, the damage was incalculable. The Abwehr's credibility with Hitler's regime was shattered. Canaris's warnings about Allied infiltration went unheeded. His department's failures marked the beginning of his downfall. German intelligence would never again operate with the same freedom or confidence. The war of shadows had turned decisively against them. And as Allied ships gathered in the Atlantic, and American factories shifted into wartime production, the story of one unassuming suitcase faded quietly into classified archives, its secret purpose fulfilled. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, The world emerged from 6 years of devastation into a new, uncertain peace. Yet in the offices of intelligence agencies across Europe and America, the war never truly ended. The tools, techniques, and philosophies forged during those desperate years became the blueprint for the Cold War to come. And at the heart of that blueprint lay the lessons of the empty suitcase. In Britain, MI5 officers who had designed the operation went on to advise the newly formed NATO Intelligence Committee. Their principles, deception, control of narrative, and the weaponization of trust, would define espionage for decades. The idea was simple. The best intelligence wasn't gathered. It was planted. The briefcase, once used to bait the Abwehr, became the prototype for a generation of concealment devices. Radios and typewriters, cameras and pens, transmitters and clocks. The line between truth and fabrication became a deliberate strategic zone. Across the Atlantic, the FBI and the newly established CIA studied these British methods closely. The wartime cooperation that began with the Duquesne case matured into the foundation of the special relationship between American and British intelligence. Covert schools were established to teach agents psychological manipulation, counter-deception, and the crafting of controlled leaks. Every operation that followed, from Cold War double-agent games to modern counterintelligence, bore the faint imprint of that original deception on the Thames docks. For the Germans, or what remained of them, the lesson was bitter. In post-war interrogations, surviving Abwehr officers admitted they never fully recovered from the loss of trust that began in 1941. They spoke of paranoia, of couriers afraid to touch documents, of analysts who questioned every message. The case had not only dismantled their networks, it had dismantled their confidence in the very concept of intelligence itself. Without belief, espionage ceases to function. The suitcase had destroyed belief. Historians still debate how much of the later Allied success in code-breaking, deception, and counter-espionage stemmed from this single operation. Some call it a footnote, others a revolution, but the evidence remains. Before the suitcase, deception was a tactic. After it, deception was a doctrine. It had shown that intelligence victory depended not just on knowing secrets, but on controlling who believed what. That principle shaped the Cold War, and still shapes intelligence work today. The war in the shadows had never been about bullets or bombs. It had been about perception, and perception, once mastered, was power itself. Years later, when veterans of Britain's wartime intelligence spoke about the great turning points of the conflict, they rarely mentioned the suitcase. It was too small, too humble a detail for the grand narratives of D-Day or El Alamein. Yet in quiet corners of archives and debriefings, its story persisted, whispered as a legend among those who understood that wars are often decided not by armies, but by illusions. The case itself, leather cracked from years of handling, became a relic. Within its frame had passed not only signals and secrets, but an entire philosophy of warfare. The deception it carried had rippled outward, collapsing networks, exposing spies, and shifting balances of power. It was the embodiment of a truth that strategists would come to phrase in many ways, that the greatest weapon in intelligence is what your enemy thinks he knows. From that single object came the unraveling of entire systems. Thousands of encrypted transmissions, dozens of agents, safe houses, false companies, code books, all traced back eventually to that night on the Thames. The Abwehr believed it had intercepted a treasure of Allied intelligence. In fact, it had intercepted its own destruction. What they held was not power but a reflection, a mirage crafted by those who understood how fear amplifies illusion. In retrospect, the brilliance of the operation lay in its restraint. No explosions, no assassinations, no overt sabotage. Just silence, patience, and a box that appeared to contain something vital. The Germans believed because they wanted to believe. The British won because they understood that desire. Intelligence, after all, is the art of making another mind reach the conclusion you've already prepared for it. As Europe rebuilt and the world entered its next ideological struggle, the principles born from that suitcase became cornerstones of modern statecraft. Misinformation, psychological operations, perception management, all trace their ancestry to that rain-slicked dock in 1940. It remains a moment frozen in intelligence history. One case, one deception, one silent victory. And somewhere in that story lies a reflection of the entire war itself, a struggle not only of weapons, but of imagination. In a quiet wing of an intelligence museum, behind glass that reflects more of the visitor's face than the display, sits an old leather suitcase. Its brass latches are dulled with age, its handle worn smooth by hands long gone. There is no label, no inscription, no sign of its true past. Only a small placard. Operational equipment, 1940. Yet those who know the archives recognize it for what it is, the silent instrument that once deceived an empire. It doesn't hum anymore. The transmitter is gone, the wires removed, the false lining open to view, but its emptiness still speaks. The museum air is still and reverent, the kind of silence found only in places that remember things too complex for celebration. Visitors pass by unaware that decades earlier, this ordinary object altered the trajectory of a world at war. The story it represents is not one of explosions or heroics, but of quiet cunning, of men and women who understood that in intelligence, the absence of noise is often the loudest signal. That suitcase triggered no bomb, fired no shot. Yet it set off a chain reaction across continents. Confusion in Berlin, arrests in New York, a collapse of confidence in the Abwehr, and the dawn of modern counterintelligence. It proved that perception could be weaponized, that truth once distorted could defeat armies. Now it sits in stillness, its legacy invisible yet vast. The war it fought was one of whispers, of radio pulses and coded glances. The people who built it never sought glory. They sought effectiveness. They fought not for headlines but for clarity in the shadows. And though their work has been buried under newer wars and newer technologies, the principle remains the same. The most powerful weapon is often not presence but absence. As a visitor walks past, the suitcase catches a flicker of light and for a moment it almost looks alive again. The brass gleams, the leather breathes, and the silence deepens. Somewhere behind that stillness, the echoes of 1940 linger. Rain on the Thames, footsteps on cobblestones, and the faint signal of a case that changed everything. If you've made it this far, you're one of us, searching for the truth behind the headlines and the courage behind the silence. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep exploring the hidden wars, secret operations, and untold fates that shape the world we live in.